"Put that thing down, old man. You're a public nuisance." The officer shoved the frail veteran, trying to snatch his flag. He had no idea who this man was, or that black SUVs were about to block the entire street. The voice, sharp and laced with impatience, sliced through the crisp morning air. 78-year-old Sergeant Thomas Cole, frail but resolute, clutched a small, meticulously folded American flag to his chest. He stood before the newly erected chain-link fence that cordoned off Veterans Memorial Plaza, a place he'd visited like a sanctuary for nearly half a century. Today, it was an open wound, a construction site marked for what the city council called redevelopment, a word that tasted like ash in Thomas's mouth. He hadn't intended to cause a nuisance. He only wanted to find a small, dignified spot, a patch of earth near the granite stones etched with the names of the fallen, to place his flag. It was a promise whispered to a ghost long ago, a promise he intended to keep. The young police officer, whose name tag read Brand, took another aggressive step toward him. He couldn't have been older than Thomas's own grandson would have been. His hand rested casually on the butt of his service weapon, a gesture of implicit threat. "I said, put it down." Thomas flinched, not from fear, but from the sheer, unadulterated disrespect that radiated from the officer like a bitter cold. His gnarled fingers, a roadmap of a life lived hard and long, tightened on the worn fabric. "Comment, respect, if you believe our elders, especially those who have served, deserve our utmost honor." Thomas Cole was a man carved from the remnants of a bygone era, a time when duty and honor were not just words but the very bedrock of existence. His body bore the stoop of his years, but his watery blue eyes had witnessed more than most could imagine. He lived a quiet life in a small, threadbare apartment, his days measured by the ticking of an old clock and the meager offerings of his veteran's pension. Yet, he undertook his daily pilgrimage to the memorial with unwavering dedication. It wasn't just stone and bronze to him, it was sacred ground, a repository of ghosts and echoes. The controversy had been brewing for months. A local developer with deep pockets and deeper connections planned to build luxury condos, shrinking the memorial to a token patch of green. Thomas knew, with a certainty that settled cold in his bones, that this redevelopment was a desecration. The sight of the raw fence and a massive bulldozer parked callously behind it, its metal tracks scarring the memorial bricks he'd helped fundraise for, struck him like a physical blow. He was merely looking for an alternative, a patch of grass, a crevice in the stone wall, anywhere he could honor his silent vow. He was unassuming, almost invisible in his faded coat and worn trousers. Officer Brand puffed out his chest. "Sir, this area is restricted. You need to move along. Now." His voice was devoid of empathy, a blunt instrument of authority. A second officer, older with a weary face and a name tag identifying him as Russo, stood slightly behind, observing. Thomas looked from the fence to Officer Brand, his gaze pleading. I just need to place this," he said, his voice raspy with age and emotion, gesturing with the folded flag. "It's important." Officer Brand scoffed, a small, ugly sound. "Important? It's a construction site, old-timer. Nothing important is happening here except what the city has sanctioned. Your flag isn't part of the plan." A small knot of bystanders had begun to gather. A mother pulling her child closer, a businessman frowning at the delay, and a couple of teenagers smirking and filming on their phones. One of them, a young man in a designer hoodie, called out, "Hey Grandpa, what century are you living in?" The laughter stung Thomas more than the cold wind that whipped around the corner. He wasn't a troublemaker. He never had been. He was a man of peace, of quiet remembrance. But this flag, this small square of fabric, represented something inviolable. He took a tentative step towards a gap in the fence, hoping to reach a small rose bush that still clung to life just inside the perimeter. "Please," he whispered, "just a moment." The humiliation was a rising tide. He felt the stares of the crowd, the mix of pity and scorn. Officer Russo shifted uncomfortably, his gaze flickering between his partner and the old soldier. He recognized the look in Thomas's eyes, not of a protester, but of a pilgrim. Brand, maybe we can just let him. Stay out of this, Russo, Brand snapped, his authority now fueled by the public audience. He turned his full attention back to Thomas, his face a mask of condescending power. I'm not going to tell you again. This area is off limits. What is so special about that old rag, anyway? You old guys and your sentimentality, it's holding back progress. It's not a rag, Thomas said, his voice quiet but firm, a spark of the sergeant he once was igniting in his chest. It's a promise. The officer rolled his eyes, a theatrical gesture for the growing crowd. A promise to who? Your bingo club. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. Leave now, or I will remove you. Physically. Comment respect if you think what this officer did next crossed the line. He was enjoying this, the power he held over the frail man, the rapt attention of the onlookers. For Officer Brand, this wasn't about enforcing a city ordinance anymore, it was about dominance. And Thomas Cole, with his quiet dignity and tattered flag, was an obstacle to be broken. That's enough, Officer Brand barked, his patience, already wafer-thin, finally snapping. He lunged forward. It wasn't a gentle escort, it was a shove. He slammed his hands against Thomas's thin shoulders, pushing him backward with a force that sent the old soldier stumbling against the cold, unyielding chain-link fence. Thomas cried out, a small, startled sound more from shock than pain. The impact rattled his old bones, and for a terrifying second, the world tilted. The flag, his precious flag, slipped from his grasp. It fluttered precariously in the air, a flash of red, white, and blue against the gray morning. With a surge of adrenaline, Thomas snatched it back, clutching it desperately to his chest as if it were a living thing. His heart hammered against his ribs. Officer Russo took a half-step forward. Brand, take it easy. He's an old man. But Brand was on a power trip, fueled by the perceived defiance of this frail figure. He's obstructing a lawful city project and refusing to comply. Brand's face was inches from Thomas's, spittle flying as he spoke. He reached out to snatch the flag. No. Thomas recoiled, holding it tighter. You don't understand. The pressure in Thomas's chest was immense. He felt dizzy, the faces around him blurring. He could hear the jeers of some onlookers, the concerned murmurs of others. For a fleeting moment, the roar of the crowd faded, replaced by the deafening thunder of artillery and the screams of men in a frozen, foreign landscape. He saw a flash of a young woman's face, her eyes full of love and fear as she pressed this very flag into his hand. Bring it back, Tommy. Promise me you'll bring it back. The memory was shattered by the cold bite of metal. Officer Brand had roughly wrenched Thomas's arm behind his back and was producing a pair of handcuffs. The indignity was a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. The click of the steel echoed with a terrifying finality. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not over this. Breathless, his voice cracking with a pain that went far beyond the physical, a pain that spanned decades of loss and remembrance, Thomas gasped out the only words that mattered. She gave it to me. He choked out, his body trembling. Before chosen reservoir. Brand paused for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, before he sneered. Chosen? What are you talking about, Grandpa? Some old war story? Save it. He tightened his grip, preparing to force the cuffs onto Thomas's fragile wrists. Suddenly, a different sound cut through the air. Not the familiar yelp of police sirens, but a deeper, more powerful thrum. Heads turned. Down the street, moving with an unnerving speed and precision, came a convoy of 3 sleek, black SUVs. They didn't slow, didn't signal. They didn't have to. They simply turned and pulled up sharply, their movements so synchronized they seemed to operate as a single organism. With silent, hydraulic grace, they blocked the entire width of the street, their tinted windows reflecting the shocked faces of the onlookers and the suddenly hesitant officers. The casual arrogance of Officer Brand visibly deflated. The jeers from the crowd died in their throats. The world seemed to hold its breath. Doors opened with a pneumatic hiss. Several men in dark, impeccably tailored suits emerged. They moved with an economy of motion, earpieces glinting, their eyes scanning the scene with unnerving intensity. They didn't look like cops or city officials. They looked like something else entirely, operators from a world of quiet, absolute power. One man, slightly older than the rest, with an air of quiet, indisputable authority, stepped out from the lead vehicle. He wasn't in uniform, but his bearing, the set of his jaw, the way he surveyed the scene, spoke of command. He paused for a moment, his gaze sweeping over the cordoned-off memorial, the confused crowd, the two police officers, and finally, resting on the small, hunched figure of Thomas Cole, who was now struggling to stay upright as Officer Brand still fumbled with the handcuffs. The man in the suit frowned, a deep line appearing between his brows. He began to walk towards them, his polished shoes making no sound on the pavement. The crowd parted for him like a ship through water. The atmosphere on the street had shifted palpably. The power dynamic had been shattered and rewritten in the span of 30 seconds. This was no longer Officer Brand's show. It was questionable if it had ever been. The man in the suit, his expression unreadable but intensely focused, approached the chaotic scene, his presence a vortex of calm in the center of the storm. Officer Brand, mid-maneuver with the handcuffs, looked up, startled and annoyed by the interruption. "Hey, this is a police matter." "Stay back," he blustered, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. The man ignored him completely, his eyes fixed on Thomas. As he drew closer, a look of stunned disbelief, then dawning recognition, spread across his distinguished features. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze softening as he took in Thomas's distressed state, the tear in his old coat, the way he still clutched the small flag. "Thomas," the man said, his voice quiet but carrying clearly. "Sergeant Thomas Cole, is that truly you?" Thomas looked up, his vision blurred by tears of frustration and a dawning, disoriented hope. He didn't recognize the face immediately, but there was something in the voice, a timbre of respect and concern he hadn't heard in what felt like an eternity. The man in the suit moved swiftly, stepping between Thomas and Officer Brand. With a gentle but firm hand, he pushed Brand's arm away from Thomas. "Unhand him, officer." It wasn't a request. It was a command, delivered with an authority that brooked no argument. Miller, dumbfounded, momentarily froze. The man reached for the handcuffs still dangling from Brand's grasp and, with a decisive click, removed them. He then gently placed a supportive arm around Thomas's shoulders. "What in God's name is happening here?" he asked, his gaze now turning cold and hard towards the two police officers. Officer Russo looked down at his shoes, a flush creeping up his neck. Brand, however, still tried to assert himself. "This man was causing a disturbance, sir." He refused to leave a restricted area. The man, General Matthews, though no one there yet knew his rank or name, straightened to his full height. He seemed to tower over the officers. His eyes fell upon the small, folded flag in Thomas's trembling hand. "May I, Thomas?" he asked softly, before gently taking the worn fabric. He carefully unfolded a small portion of it, his breath hitching. There, almost hidden in a faded corner, was a tiny, delicately embroidered initial, H. A wave of emotion, grief, anger, and a profound, almost reverent sorrow, washed over Matthews's face. He turned back to the officers, his voice now like chips of ice. "Do you have any idea who this man is?" Brand began to stammer. He's just some old citizen, sir, who wouldn't listen to reason." Matthews's voice dropped, becoming dangerously quiet. "This man, officers, is Sergeant Thomas Cole, recipient of the Medal of Honor." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Phones that had been recording for amusement now recorded in stunned silence. Brand's jaw literally dropped, his face draining of all color. He earned that medal at the chosen reservoir, Matthews continued, his voice thick with emotion. Holding the line against overwhelming odds after his entire command structure was wiped out. He sustained 3 gunshot wounds but continued to fight, saving the remnants of his company. His commanding officer, who died in his arms, was my father. Another wave of shock rippled through the onlookers. Matthews held up the small, tattered flag. And this flag, this old rag, as I believe I heard one of you call it, his eyes bored into Brand, who looked as if he might faint, this flag was given to Sergeant Cole by my mother, Helen, before he and my father deployed to Korea. She embroidered her initial on it herself. She made him promise to bring it back. And he did. This ground you are so callously redeveloping. Sergeant Cole was instrumental in fundraising for its creation, to honor the men he fought with. The men he lost. Including my father. The silence that followed General Matthews's words was absolute, heavy, and charged with a mixture of shame and awe. Officer Brand looked like he'd been struck by lightning, his face pale, his eyes wide with dawning horror. Officer Russo stared at the ground, his shoulders slumped, the very picture of remorse. The smirks had vanished from the faces of the teenagers. They now looked on with a new, somber understanding. My men will open a path for you, Thomas, Matthews said softly, his composure regained but his eyes still blazing with righteous anger. One of the suited men swiftly unclipped a section of the chain-link fence, creating an opening. Leaning heavily on the general's arm, Sergeant Thomas Cole, Medal of Honor recipient, walked slowly, reverently, onto the contested ground. He knelt with Matthews's assistance by the rose bush he'd noticed earlier, its defiant blooms a splash of color against the drab earth. With trembling hands, he carefully unfolded Helen's flag and laid it gently at the base of the bush. He remained there for a moment, head bowed, a silent prayer or a memory passing across his lips. The crowd watched in profound silence, many openly weeping. When Thomas was ready, Matthews helped him to his feet. He then turned to the 2 policemen, his voice devoid of its earlier emotion, now flat and chillingly authoritative. Officers Brand and Russo. You will escort Mr. Cole back to his home. With full honors and an apology. Then, you will report immediately to your precinct captain. Inform him that General Mark Matthews will be in contact with him, and with the mayor's office, before the day is out. You will tell him that this desecration, he said, gesturing to the fence and the bulldozer, stops now. In the weeks that followed, General Matthews was true to his word. The controversial redevelopment plan was permanently halted. An investigation into the developer's contracts uncovered backroom deals that shook City Hall. Officer Brand, stripped of his bravado, faced a disciplinary board and was assigned to extensive retraining focusing on de-escalation and veteran sensitivity. The city, under immense public pressure, voted to refurbish and expand the memorial. Officer Russo, humbled and changed, occasionally stopped by Thomas's apartment, sometimes just to talk, sometimes bringing his own son to listen to stories. The war memorial, now pristine, became a true sanctuary. True worth, like a well-kept promise, endures beyond the blindness of ignorance. It demands to be honored, not for glory, but for the profound truth of what it represents. Remember that true heroes often walk among us, unassuming and silent. Subscribe for more stories that remind us of the enduring power of the human spirit. Type honor in the comments if you believe the quiet sacrifices of men like Thomas Cole should never be forgotten. Share this story if you agree that respect is never optional.